In today's video, we will be going over the theory that One For All will willingly be given to Shigaraki, making him the 10th user of One For All, and how that will inevitably lead to Shigaraki's downfall. But before I get into today's video, if you are new to the channel, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on if you haven't done so already, that way you never miss an upload. With that said, let's get back to the video. So yeah, you heard me correctly. Deku, by the end of the series, is going to willingly hand over One For All to Shigaraki, and that will be how Shigaraki is defeated. I know, it sounds crazy, but hear me out. With all of the recent information we got on One For All in chapter 304 and 305, and everything that went down during the Paranormal Liberation War arc, I believe Horikoshi has been heavily foreshadowing and teasing that this is how Deku will defeat Shigaraki, and here's why. In chapter 304, we find out exactly what All Might was hiding from Deku about the 4th user of One For All, which was insane because we learned that Hikage Shinomori, aka the 4th user of One For All, had died at the age of 40 due to old age. But wait, how did he die of old age if he was only 40 years old, you might be asking? Well, it turns out that during Shinomori's final years of being alive, cracks started appearing on his body. This happened because One For All places a terrible burden on someone's body when they already have a quirk prior to receiving One For All, meaning that possessing multiple quirks ate away at Shinomori's life. We also learned in chapter 304 that Shinomori was the 2nd user to have One For All for the longest time, just after All Might. The reason why All Might was able to live longer than Shinomori in the first place was because he was quirkless. And as the first wielder of One For All stated, and I quote, "A vessel with an existing quirk of its own could not receive One For All without it warping and spilling over, and attempting to force it anyways results in a shortened lifespan as the 4th experienced. For 40 years, Yagi maintained his grip on One For All. It was the perfect fit for his previously empty vessel, and as such, it truly became his quirk. By some twist of fate, this power that must pass from one to the next wound up being meant for those who lacked power to start with. They are the ones who can draw out its true value." End quote. Now, this is very important to the theory and to the main story as a whole, because this means that if One For All were to be passed on to another user, a normal person won't be able to handle the immense burden that One For All would have on their body. And in a world where 80% of the world's population has a quirk and is considered to be normal, anyone who has a quirk could not be the next user of One For All. The only people that could inherit One For All would have to be quirkless. But in Deku's generation, quirkless individuals have all but vanished. So if Deku wanted to pass on One For All, he is unlikely going to come across another individual who needs this power and is also quirkless, meaning that Deku could possibly be the last wielder of One For All. Now, throughout the series, we have been shown just how much of a burden having multiple quirks can be. At the end of the Stain arc, we were shown that when All For One gave people quirks, the load was too much for some people to bear. So many would end up becoming mere puppets unable to speak, just like most of the Nomu. And as we know and saw from the My Villain Academia arc and the Paranormal Liberation War arc, Shigaraki was genetically modified in a way so that his body is able to handle multiple quirks at once, including the power of All For One. It's even stated that once his body is 100% completed, Shigaraki would have enough power to steal One For All away from Deku. But Shigaraki's progress during the Paranormal Liberation War arc was halted, and his body was only 75% completed. During Shigaraki's fight against Endeavor, Bakugo, Deku, and the rest of the heroes, we see that even at 75% completion, Shigaraki's body was tearing itself apart, forming these many cracks all over his body because the power of All For One was too much for his body to keep up with. Even Shigaraki's regenerative abilities couldn't keep up with the damage caused by All For One and everyone else's attacks. And the one who noticed that Shigaraki's body couldn't keep up with the power of All For One was Deku, due to it being very similar to when he uses One For All, and how his body hasn't completely adjusted to One For All's power yet. Oddly enough, just like the fourth user of One For All, Shigaraki formed similar cracks all over his body because All For One was too much for his body to handle, just like the fourth user when it came to One For All. Now, even though it's stated that when Shigaraki's body is at its 100% completion, Shigaraki's body would then be able to handle All For One, and then he would have enough power to steal One For All away from Deku. It's never stated that his body will be able to handle the power of One For All on top of All For One and his decay quirk. And here is when the theory truly starts to take its shape when you put all of the pieces together. I believe that in Deku's final fight with Shigaraki, Shigaraki will have reached 100% completion, making Shigaraki too powerful to be beaten by anyone, even by a 100% Deku. Seeing that there is possibly no way and no hope in defeating Shigaraki in this state, Deku will then remember his conversation with the vestiges of One For All about how One For All cannot be passed down to a person who already possesses a quirk, and he will then remember what happened to Shigaraki's body when it was only 75% completed back in the War Arc. He will then realize that Dr. Garaki and All For One never accounted for what would happen to Shigaraki's body when receiving One For All on top of All For One and his original quirk, Decay. As we know from chapter 305, Deku would rather use One For All as a power to save people rather than to kill. And Deku really wants to try and help Shigaraki because back during the War Arc, when they were both inside of the One For All world, when Deku looked inside of Shigaraki's eyes, all he could see was a crying child deep within him, which is why Deku ended up saying that Shigaraki looked like he needed to be saved or that he needed saving. But I think their final fight is going to be the point where Deku realizes that Shigaraki cannot be saved and that giving One For All to him will be the only way to stop all of this death and destruction that's being caused by Shigaraki and All For One. And once Deku willingly gives up One For All to Shigaraki, Shigaraki will then officially become the 10th wielder of One For All. But as Shigaraki tries to use One For All to end the rest of the heroes and Deku, his body will immediately start tearing itself apart rapidly due to his body not being able to withstand the immense power of having One For All on top of All For One and Decay. It would prove to be too much for Shigaraki's body to handle. Too many quirks will be in one body. Shigaraki is then going to try to forcefully control all of this overflowing power, but as the first user stated, a vessel with an existing quirk of its own could not receive One For All without it warping and spilling over, and attempting to force it anyways results in a shortened lifespan, as the fourth user had experienced. All of this power will end up being Shigaraki's downfall, rapidly shortening his lifespan, killing him, tearing up his body so bad that his regenerative abilities won't be able to keep up with the damage. And that's how I think Deku will defeat Shigaraki, by willingly giving him One For All, making him the 10th user of One For All. Now, I could also see this going down in a way where having all of this power will end up making Shigaraki's limbs explode out of his own body. This would be a cool callback to the beginning of the series, where if Deku had not properly trained his body to become a proper vessel for One For All, his body would explode due to the power being too much for his body to handle. Also, if by any chance Shigaraki does end up being saved, I could see this tactic still being used on All For One himself, because unlike Shigaraki, All For One 100% cannot be saved in any way possible. That man is for sure irredeemable no matter how you look at it. With that said, let me know in the comment section below your thoughts on today's theory. Do you think Deku will give Shigaraki One For All in order to defeat him, or do you think Shigaraki will be defeated some other way by the end of the series? Let me know everything in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to Detroit smash that like button below, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. If you want to see more My Hero Academia content, then be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on to join the Kitoroki Hero Academia to become my hero. Doing all of this really does help the channel out a lot, and it's always appreciated. Remember to stay plus ultra, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.